Hello, I'm Steve, and this is Michaela, and we're here today to bring you an interview.
But we are also here to talk about Steve Moriarty. He was the drummer of the band The Gits, and as a lot of you know, The Gits were a band in the 1990s, and they were fronted by Mia Zapata, an amazing singer who sadly went before her time. And Steve Moriarty has done many wonderful things since then. He is still a musician in a band called Wolves of Argyle, and he is also a counselor. We're going to talk about all that. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're welcome.
Alrighty, cool.
My pleasure.
So, start at the beginning. Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. Yes, and I was raised there as best I could be, and then left home when I was 17, and I went to Europe and lived in Spain, and I taught drums and English, and I played in a band, and quit high school, and then I wrote an essay and came back from Spain after a year and went to college at Antioch, and so that was my coming of age, I guess. I was in Ohio at Yellow Springs, Ohio at Antioch College.
Okay.
Yes.
So, I'm kind of curious how you got into the drums to begin with.
I think they got into me. I was just thinking about that, like, what inspired me about music, and I remember being at some, like, church basement, and they were singing hymns, and it was I don't remember if it was the Friends Church or whatever, but there was going to be a Boy Scout meeting there afterwards. I was like 4 or 5 maybe, and I noticed they were singing like, it's kind of the same melody as the Ants Go Marching One by One, Ants Go Marching Two by Two, you know? It was like, we're marching to Pretoria, and the lyrics are really violent. They're like, we're marching to like kill the Jews and the pagans, right? Marching to Pretoria, Pretoria, and then have the thing like the rated G version is like the ants go marching one by one. So anyway, we were singing the song, everyone's clapping, go marching, right? And I'm like, how do they know how to clap at the same time? Like, who tells them when to do it? And like, how does it all land at the same time in the same place and make one sound? And I tripped out on that. And I was so little, and I was like, how do they know? Like, how are their brains connected like that? All these people's brains, like, knowing exactly how to do that. And then that was like something that I just started thinking about all the time. And every time I saw, remember they used to have like little concerts at my elementary school, or puppet shows where there'd be music or something, so the teachers could have a break or whatever it was. And I would hear music and just listen to the tones of the drums and the rhythm, and just it tripped me out. It fascinated me. And so I started playing, and then I went to this like sports camp. It was like a neighborhood sports after school program thing, and they had t-ball and soccer and other basketball, and it was in this African American neighborhood. And Indianapolis is like it's rather segregated, but it's a lot of black folks that live there, and a lot of, when I was growing up, white folks and black folks in 2 different neighborhoods, and then there's kind of some tracks, you would cross. It's called Meridian Street or something. And anyway, we would go. I was in these ball leagues with these kids, and rap was just starting up, like really early rap, probably like what was that guy? The guy who does Grandmaster Flash, right?
Yes.
So they were doing like rap stuff, and then and I heard them doing that, and I started to be able to do it too. I'm like, I know what I'm doing, I can do this as well. And so I made friends like that by doing like this hand jive stuff. And I also kept from getting beat up because I was like the only white kid there. And so I started to relate to rhythm that way, as like a peacemaker, sort of like a way to stay out of trouble and to make friends. And then my brother was like in 6th or 7th grade. He was 4 years older than me. And then he wanted to have a band, so like I think he made pictures of being in a band on his notebooks, and he said, we're going to do it. And some guy brought over a drum set, a bass drum and a snare drum. And they were doing, I don't remember what song it was, like a Doobie Brothers song or something. And I remember hiding around the corner of the living room where they were set up, and there was a piano in there, and I could play piano, and there was some guy with a guitar, and then a drum set, and they didn't know how to play. Any of them, they didn't know how to play the song together or how to play with one another. But they were going to try, and I don't know what my brother was doing. He was like don't think he was playing anything. I think he was just supplying our house as the venue for these kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember hearing the bass drum, like going, and like how heavy that sounded, and how like it moved everything in the room. Like boom, it was like the loudest, lowest thing I ever heard. And then I remember thinking right then, like, I'm gonna play those drums. I'm gonna figure out. I want to play those. And they took a break and they went to go outside and run around or something, and I just went and like kicked the bass drum to just feel it. And I was like, oh my god, I freaked out. And then I started tapping on my mother's glasses and pots and pans with spoons. And she got frustrated and was like, okay, if you stop doing that, I'll get you drum lessons. And I was like, okay, let's go. And so I started taking drum lessons from this jazz guy who had played on the original Tonight Show band.
Nice.
He's like the drummer in the original Tonight Show. I don't even know when that was, like the 1950s or 60s. And he was a brilliant jazz drum set player, and I studied with him for about 6 years, and then I started reading music and trying to play piano and bass, and I could sight read music, so they had competitions. They had competitions in Chicago and Indianapolis and Cleveland and around there. I started playing a drum solo that was written. It was from like a Dave Brubeck song or some famous jazz composition solo that some guy had played, like I think it was like Philly Joe Jones solo. And I played it and got all the dynamics. I studied it, and then I started entering contests, and I started winning these gold medals after gold medal playing solo drum set pieces. And right up till the time I ran away from home. So that was like what I was doing. And so right by the time I finished high school, I mean I didn't finish it. By the time I left home at 17, I was able to teach other people. So I started teaching people in Europe because they thought an American drummer, because jazz being the only American art form that's truly, American or from here. They thought that, like, they also thought basketball players had to be American to be good.
Oh.
Like, we kind of think soccer players have to be from a European country or South America to be any good.
Yeah.
Like, in Spain, they thought that to be a jazz musician, you had to be American. And I wasn't black, but, like, I was still, I was okay because I played drums and I was American.
Yeah. And
basketball. So they had me be on the basketball team. Everyone wanted me on their team, and I couldn't play it at all, man. And they would pass me the ball, and I would like drop it and lose it. And still, every time they would pick me to be on their team, like when they did the pick. And everyone would want me on their team, and I wasn't even that much taller than anybody. And I couldn't handle the ball. I couldn't shoot it. I was like missed the rim and everything. But I don't know, something about like those stereotypes. They work in many directions.
Sounds like a fun time.
So that was my that's my story.
Okay. Well,
are we finished?
Well, with that portion.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, let's get to Antioch.
Okay.
Tell me about meeting the 3 members of the Gits there.
Meeting the 3 members of the Gits. Well, Matt and Andy lived like in the same hall as me. I think Matt lived next door and Andy lived across the hall. And yeah, Matt was very annoying, and he played the Violent Femmes on his boombox, the same tape over and over and over and over for like the first week I was at college. And finally I was like, hey, what is that you're playing? Like trying to act like I liked it. And he was like, it's the Violent Femmes. I'm from New York. I was going to go to RISD, but I couldn't. I applied too late, so I'm going to enter late to RISD, and I'll be able to go to Rhode Island School of Design. I'm just here just because I'm waiting for my acceptance letter from RISD. I was like, oh, okay, cool. He must be important. And then across the hall, Andy was like, I had his cassette player, and he was playing all kinds of crazy music, like Frank Zappa and then New York City like punk bands, like Agnostic Front, like heavy sort of hardcore bands, and the Dead Kennedys from San Francisco, and all these different groups that I'd never heard before because they didn't have that music in Indiana. I mean, you couldn't buy the records; they were considered like illegal, essentially. Like it was like looking through like pornography to like go to the hardcore or the punk section in a record store. Like sometimes it was literally behind a curtain, and you would go back and look through like this. You'd find the Circle Jerks, right? It was like a horrible name for a band, and the Bad Brains and the Dead Kennedys. I mean, these were offensive titles, right? Black Flag that would have pictures of like a guy shooting a cop, right?
Yeah.
Or smashing a cop's head with a knife, right? These were the covers of the Black Flag records, right? So like they were dangerous Really, people thought of them as subversive and scary and
Mm-hmm.
dangerous, and they were classified as such in record stores, and that's why they were hardly distributed and people hardly carried them because they could get shut down for having those records in their store.
Yeah.
They could be fined.
But yet they sold Motley Crue right in front.
And yeah,
It's like-
yeah, that's true. I know,
Yeah,
but see, that
it's
was
like-
commercialized, and that was like hair metal for the masses, and it was created by the entertainment industry, where these other bands were coming from the underground,
Mhm.
not from the mainstream entertainment industry. They were like self-created, and they were challenging the status quo of what made hair metal, right?
Yeah, exactly. I
They
mean,
were-
hair metal
yeah,
was about
they were
getting girls,
subverting it,
basically.
right? So they had an interest in keeping those record companies that were putting out records and those bands down, until eventually, like, they would try to co-opt them by signing them to, if they started to be popular, they would, hey, come sign a contract, and then if they didn't like you, they would just let your band go away, or make it so hard for you to actually tour, or make music, or record. They'd make life so difficult, so your band would break up, so you wouldn't be a nuisance anymore, and you wouldn't challenge the other bands, right? So there are different ways that they tried to sort of do away with punk rock, but that's kind of what I think was the main. I mean, it was like if you looked a little different and you went to see a band like the Dead Kennedys playing, you could get beat up, like on your way to the show, or at the show, or outside, and the show itself might even be violent, might be crazy, because there might be a skinhead gang there going to see the Dead Kennedys because they either hate them for having like a communist message or something, or they don't know that it's a communist message and they think that their satire is actually literal.
Yeah.
And so they believe in that, right? And so the press also would take things literally as opposed to as parody or satire.
Mhm.
And so that's what made it scary and offensive to the status quo and to most normal. That's why I guess they made a polite term out of hardcore and punk and new wave, right? That was also scary because of the hair and the gender bending, right?
Yes.
Boy George, and like that was not done before. Even in England, that band, the Slits, right? It was all women band, right? They're all female, and they would be stabbed in the streets of London, like a somewhat a progressive major capital in the world. Like one of those girls, women, was stabbed like 3 times just for being wearing whatever she was wearing that day, for being a punk.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was quite. I mean, John Lydon had been stabbed 2 or 3 times because they can't have guns in England, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'd been shot. Like, right? If they
Here in
allowed guns, they'd be
America.
dead, right? If they're
Yeah.
in America, but in England, knives is what people used, to thugs used to try to hurt people. So it was really common. And even when we played the show, I was looking for because it was on my phone, but a poster of the Dead Kennedys who were playing at Antioch, because they played in '85 there.
Yeah.
The FBI showed up and was taking pictures of all the kids at the show.
Mhm.
Like, just in case there was a demonstration, they would have something on these kids and be able to trace them and like keep files on these kids, and
Yeah.
it was real. It was real stuff, and they were FBI, and yeah, they asked for their ID, and then we had the campus security throw them out of the show.
Good.
Yes, for taking pictures of all the kids that were there. But I saw the Dead Kennedys at Antioch with Andy and Matt and Mia, and I don't want to tell the story because I'm writing about the story and it's kind of part of the book. But I met them pretty much at that time at that college when they put on that show, my first autumn that I was in college, and they had a different drummer who lives in Los Angeles now.
Okay.
He went on to play with Mike Watt and a lot of different bands. But when he was playing with the Gits, he wasn't so steady. And I heard some recordings, and so they asked him to. I don't know how they asked him, but they kicked him out of the band and they asked me to join. And I think Mia was the one that asked me, like, I have something I want to talk to you about, Steve. I'm like, oh, I didn't know what it was. I was like nervous because she was like this older woman, right? She was like 19, I was 18. And I went over to her apartment, and she we were wondering if you want to be the drummer for the Gits, and I was like, yeah, of course. But then I didn't. Then I thought, oh, I feel sorry for that guy who's playing with them now because they're going to kick him out. Like, okay, we'll go kick out Bob. I'm like, no, don't do that. Don't kick out Bob. Oh, shit. And I kicked out Bob, and then I started playing. So they had Bob for about a month.
Okay.
I don't remember if they played that Dead Kennedy show. I think I know that show changed my life when I saw the Dead Kennedys play, and I told Jello Biafra that because I jammed with him. I don't know, a couple years ago with his new band, and I told him, like, you know, your band and seeing your band changed my life, changed the way I listen to music and how I play music and what I do in the world and how I see the world, and I was just like, wanted to thank you, and he just can't handle that. He just can't handle like praise or adulation. I think adulation, and he kind of brushed it off. And I gave him a gift. I remember because I had a wristwatch from China that was like a picture of Chairman Mao going like this, like raving at people. And I gave him my Chairman Mao watch, and it worked. You know, it was one of those move, and like it wound itself and stuff. It was really Chinese. It was really from communist China, right? From the 70s. Like, oh, what's this? Oh, it's a watch. Doesn't it work? It doesn't even work. I bet it doesn't keep time. I said, no, I just want to thank you for, you know, changing my life. And he was like, forget about it. Kid, get out of here. Fanboy. So I was like, okay, see you. I didn't play with him again. Yeah. No, they were, yeah. His new bands. It's not the Dead Kennedys. They were a great band.
So describe to me what it was like when, did we talk about when you first met Mia yet?
I think I met her. She and her friend Jessie were art students, and they were like two peas in a pod. They were like best friends, and they were both beautiful and slender. I remember, and tall. And they were both these like exotic older art students that I thought were really interesting. And then I heard Mia sing. I don't know when or how, but I remember she was playing guitar and could barely play guitar, but she was singing like. And I was really aware of jazz singers like Billie Holiday and Nina Simone even, and a lot of the greats. So like when I heard Mia sing, I mean I thought it was a record, and I think that Ricky Lee Jones record hadn't come out, and I was listening to it. The her first record, you know, where she's smoking a cigarette and has a beret. Yeah. It looks like a French woman. And I remember thinking, gosh, she's as good as Ricky Lee Jones. Oh my God, listen to that, you know, voice. And I know that Matt and Andy had the same sort of realization. And I think that we probably came together around. I think we formed as interest in Mia as a musical partner, right? Matt had never played an instrument before, and he picked up the bass. It was a Steinberger copy bass. It had no body and no headstock. It was just like a stick. It was like $100 or something. And it sounded terrible, but like he was like, "Oh, I want to have a band." And so he tried to get people to teach him stuff, and he ended up being like great at it. And Andy had studied jazz guitar and could play really complex things and chords, but could also had grown up with the Ramones and bands. The Dead Boys and the hardcore bands that he had seen growing up in Brooklyn and going to CBGBs. And Matt had grown up in New Jersey and was also going to the same shows that Andy was going to, but they didn't know each other until they met in Ohio. And they both hated Ohio because they said the pizza sucked. And like, it was like living in a cornfield after living in New York City is like, it's really different for them. Can't imagine. Yeah. But Mia had grown up in Louisville, Kentucky, which is only 45 minutes from Indianapolis, where I grew up. So we kind of came from the same, like, culture or lack thereof, right? And had to create kind of our own scene. We all had a different relationship with her, like friendship and intimacy. And I think it was really like we were brothers and with the sister. And it was her voice and her gentleness, I think, that brought us together. Like her just sweetness and like her heart, really. She was just a genuinely like funny, warm, silly person. And so I think we were all, and together it was just fun. We just hung out together and felt almost like a gang. Like the four of us felt like we felt stronger, I think, together. We each, like, even though we were all so different, we kind of like knew that if one of us was in a situation that somebody else we didn't understand, maybe somebody else would understand that situation, whether it was like troublesome or, you know, how to accomplish something or how to get from point A to point B or whatever the need was. Like, we would help each other try to do that. So Matt and I graduated from Antioch, and Andy and Mia did not.
Okay. Yeah. Like, is that because you guys decided to move to Seattle prior to them graduating?
No, actually, they started a year before us, Mia and Andy. Andy just lost interest, I think, in college, and he didn't. He wanted to be in the. I know he wanted to be in the band because that's all he really. It's all he really seemed interested in, and music. And Mia, I think she had dyslexia pretty badly.
Oh, okay.
Her mom told me last year, and I think that she couldn't handle a lot of the writing, and the math, and some of the problem solving that school created. And she was purely an artist, but she had a hard time completing something. But everything she did complete was things that wouldn't seem completed for maybe the professor, were so complete in and of themselves, right? Even in the sketches that she would draw, maybe she would be done with it herself. Like, I just can't finish. I can't finish it for the project. I can't do this. But then you'd look at the piece and it would be done already, right? But it wouldn't meet someone else's idea of done. But then you would take a look at it as a piece on its own, and you could see it. So that was really interesting. I remember going to hang out with her in her art studio in this big hall where all the artists had little studio cubbies where they worked, right? And they'd have their space, and they looked over like more spaces down. And she had one that was on this sort of catwalk, and we would blast Iggy Pop and different bands that she was, whatever she had her tapes up there too. So she would play her tapes, and we would hang out, and oftentimes she'd have a bottle of something, and we'd drink that, or she'd be drinking beer and working on something and not even talk, but you just sit there and hang out in the chair and listen to music while Mia painted. I remember that being like a really awesome experience, feeling like, wow, I'm here in the art building, you know? Because I was trying to study journalism and writing, and everything. I was interested in there, anthropology and psychology, so I was taking all these different courses. But the art students to me were like something different, like crazy, exotic, like fascinating people.
Nice.
And they all acted out, and they wore crazy clothes. Yeah, they were crazy.
Right, and so once you guys became a band, did you decide right away that you were going to try to make a living out of it? And...
No. I mean, I always thought of myself as making it's like a goal, a dream, like an aspiration of mine, was to be able to play music for a living, like as whatever kind of musician, whether it was like playing in a hit orchestra or playing in a punk band or being a timpani player. Like that to me was success. That would have been success, like major success. I never thought like we would be a band that would, make money. Like I never thought it was a path, like a rainbow to a pot of gold. Once the hit record was, was released and bought by the masses. I never thought. Maybe when I was 8 or 9 years old, or 10, when I discovered what rock stars were, and I had posters of bands on my walls, I would think, wow, it would be really cool to be Led Zeppelin, or to be John Bonham, or the guy from the Who, or the guy from this other band. But then I realized they were all dead, and like I didn't understand like how they could be famous and dead at the same time. No, I never thought of that as a way to make money, but I always thought that we damn well deserved to be paid, for what we did. And it's a complicated calculus how to get to be paid for music, as we discussed. And we shouldn't go into it too much because it could go on I could go on forever. But the peel away layers of the onion, and underneath there's more money, and like who's been keeping all this money, and who's been earning the interest from this money, and who's been downloading all these songs, and who's been re-releasing these records, and who's been it's just and there are these pots of royalty money that a few artists are able to recoup and gain from the industry. But as an independent band, you were kind of in it for the lifestyle as well as the livelihood. So you had to expect not to be paid. And we would tour. We'd live on $5 a day each. That was our stipend.
Wow.
So you could buy, a beer and a pack of smokes, or you could have breakfast and then hope for food later. I mean, it was really like that. And we didn't really, we would make 50 or $100 a night. I mean, split. So we would keep a war chest in the van of the money, and that would pay for gas. We had a 1976 GMC van. They got like 2 miles per gallon. We would drive that thing all over the place. So of course, like we burned through gas, and it was almost as expensive then as it is now. Because there was like a recession happening.
That's right.
We were touring around. Yeah. So it was pretty crazy, and and it's just and the formats would change as well, from records to CDs to streaming to YouTube to Spotify. The different kind of new kinds of radio, and it's challenging. Yeah.
I'm wondering what made you decide to move to Seattle rather than San Francisco?
Affordability. I mean, because Andy, Matt, and Mia had lived in San Francisco for 6 or 9 months, I think, as a band, and they lived at this place called The Farm, and it was a little warehouse on Potrero Street near San Francisco General, where there's now a skate park. I think the building is still there, and I heard rumor that they're reopening it, and it was a farm, like a pea patch, basically, where people could grow food for themselves, and they had some farm animals, some chickens and goats, and they would teach the kids in the Mission District about where their food comes from. Oh. Yeah, and so but they had this hall, so they would do punk rock shows to make money for the camp for the kids. And the bands that played there were would become like the most legendary punk bands in the world. There was the bands that they saw play while they were there, and I was off somewhere doing something else during those months, and we would write letters to one another. I don't know if I ever wrote with Matt, but I wrote with Andy, and I wrote with Mia a lot, letters, like on paper. Mm-hmm. And she'd draw little pictures sometimes, and we'd talk about what we wanted out of what we liked about different bands and music, and these long discussions on 10-page letters. And Mia would work there bartending. She would sell the drinks, like the sodas and the water, and they would sell beer, even to kids. And you get the money from that, and put that back into the farm. And then Matt was the stage manager. I remember he said that he was stage managing. He would take care of the bands and move stuff around. And Andy was security. And so they ran the farm, essentially, which was this volunteer thing they did as a college project. Cool. And I was so jealous. And the bands that would play there would be like the Bad Brains and Social Distortion and the Dead Kennedys, of course, because they're from here, and this band Tragic Mulatto that would become other bands later. Basically, like UB40, I remember, like the bands that would later influence like every other rock band and style of rock and roll that you hear now. Mm-hmm. They were doing it independently and would play there into these packed audiences. And the stories they had were just amazing. Like, they sounded horrible and scary and like really fun at the same time. And I was so jealous that they got to go there and do that, and they discovered that place. And even years later, when we would come tour in San Francisco, they had friends for life, like from people that they'd met at the farm in San Francisco. And it's a legendary venue. And if you on Facebook, there's groups of like memories from the farm, and it was really instrumental in creating the punk movement on the West Coast. There was Gilman Street in Berkeley, mm-hmm. and then there was the farm in San Francisco, and there were the all ages venues in the Bay Area.
Yeah. One thing I'm curious about is whether or not she met up with the members of Sugar Babylon when they were there as well, because that was the band that Courtney Love and Jennifer Finch and Kathy Ellen.
That was before them. That was before they formed that band. Okay. I'm pretty sure. I mean, this was in like 1983. Okay. But they were there, or 80. No, not that early. It would have been about 1986 that they were at the farm. Okay. Or 85. And I don't think Courtney Love formed a band until 89 or 88. Okay. I don't think they would have played there. I hadn't heard of them. But I knew Patty Schummel. Was Patty in the band then?
Not yet.
Not yet, right?
Not yet.
Because she used to hang out at this espresso cart where I would get my espresso in the morning because her girlfriend worked there. And we'd talk about drums, and I remember she got money from Hole, and she was at the music store, and she was asking me about different snare drums and what I like to play and what she liked to play, and I was like telling her about my snare drum that was like held together with batteries and like guitar strings because I didn't have any money to buy a good snare drum, and she had this money that she was able to buy a Ludwig Black Beauty, which was supposed to be like the best snare drum in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she could just like, I can't decide on this one or that one. I was like, oh God, what it would be like to have this snare drum, like, and she got to have it, and she's like, oh gosh. So I was like, okay, yeah, I think the Black Beauty would be the one. And I write to her sometimes on Facebook, but she doesn't. She responded once or twice, but not very often.
I actually read her book recently.
Oh yeah, It Hit So Hard.
Yes, and I got to meet her a couple of times too. She's a sweet lady.
She's very sweet. Yeah, and such a good drummer.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, her book is it's pretty harrowing. Like she had a rough time, but
I'm sure she still does a rough time and doesn't stop.
Well, I'm glad she's still around.
Yeah, she's one of the greats. Drummers from the Northwest. Her brother too. I communicate with him.
Right, Larry.
Yeah, he's nice too.
So let's talk about when you guys got to Seattle. What was it like there?
When I got to Seattle, it was repressed, and there was no work. I remember I couldn't find a job for like 6 months. I finally got a job as a barista, but yeah, I remember like it rained all the time. It seemed like it would be forever between gigs, and since we went there to play, that like finding a place to live and having to work to pay for the rent and all those grown-up things like seemed so trivial and unimportant compared. So it was really hard to work, a regular day job. I would just look forward to practice or to the gig that would be in 3 weeks, or the gig I was working on putting together, or the warehouse party we were going to play on Friday. So my head was never into like establishing much other sort of community besides in the music world. Okay. But there was a lot of people that were moving there at the same time, and a lot of people were about the same age, like right out of college, and then the year. I think like maybe 50 or 100 people in the following years finished Antioch College and moved to Seattle, and then of course there was a tech sort of explosion. So it was like these kids. There were kids, we were kids, just kids, like the Patti Smith book, all moving there, and they have this like pool of talent to draw from, because the kids right out of college from computer science class. And sort of the dawning of the internet were like there on the ground level. So a lot of my friends who were in bands went on to be, are retired now because they started Amazon.com or they worked at Microsoft and got a little stock option and then quit. And now, a lot of that was like definitely a boom time, kind of like a gold rush. And a lot of musicians that I knew got work through music because of the online music world and a music museum that was built. We needed curating, and it was exciting. But I wasn't a real social person. I mean, I was really shy, so it was kind of hard for me to get along there.
Must have helped having Mia and the others.
Yeah, and then eventually I wanted to have a collective. Like I'd read about the Crass Collective in England, and I loved like the message of that band, and then the Discord House in Washington D.C. Where the band Minor Threat had lived together, and I thought, wow, we could, I could do that. In Seattle, we'd have our own house, and then we could use that to practice in, and we could even have gigs in the house, and we could all live together, and we could create art together, and help each other out, and share expenses and resources. And I had it all planned. I mean, I think I wrote probably 10 notebooks full of ideas that I had with my girlfriend at the time, Valerie Agnew, and we were both kind of communistic. They're kind of like anarchists, and we wanted to change the world, and we tried. We tried really hard for a few years, and we did. We changed our world anyway, and maybe some other people's. But I wanted to have a household like that. I don't know. Maybe it was like a longing for a family, or just to have security, or just a creative urge to share, to try to like get inspiration. But it was definitely an intentional housing situation, and I tried to start a record label called the Rat House Records, and we released the first Gits recordings and several other bands' first recordings that would go on to make albums and record for a long time. So I guess that record still sells. I can't believe it. Like on Amazon, this compilation that we put out.
Mm-hmm.
It's considered a classic, I guess. And the first Gits single, all the Gits records, we spent our own money and designed them and worked with whoever put the money into them to put them out. Like we were always like DIY. We always did it ourselves. We just invite people in with us to help us, you know, because we didn't know how to put out a record, but we taught ourselves. We learned. Right? We call the guy at Sub Pop and meet him and just ask him a bunch of questions for as long as I could get his attention. Like, how do you distribute your records? And where do you press them? What's the address of that place? And like, what state is that in? And I remember getting the information and like it was coveted. Like you couldn't just go on the internet and find it.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't go to the library and find it because information was not updated like every day, right?
Yeah.
You had to know, like if I needed to know where pressing plant is or where a gig might be, I might have to find a magazine, you know, that was out that month. And like, oh, here's an article about Atlanta, Georgia. What's that like? Oh, here's this place here. John Coltrane's Academy of Fine Punk Rock Garage, and maybe we can find the number. Let's get a phone book from that city, and you'd find the number, and then you'd call them up and like book a gig that way. Everything was like almost like a investigation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was harder then, and they didn't. Then Maximum Rock and Roll published, which is a magazine in San Francisco, published. I think it was monthly, a Book Your Own Life edition, and they've been doing it once a year ever since around 85 or 86 and maybe 87. And it just listed all the venues across the country. And then the different bands from the Bay Area and Seattle and LA started booking their own tours around these articles that were published in the magazine. They would have a place to stay in. There would be a name as a contact and a phone number. And each city would have like, depending on how many people were there, what bands were there, is it cool, was it not cool, and like rate it somehow, and then the booker's name is so-and-so, and you can stay at his house, but if you can't stay at his house, then his sister Tina, who's a stripper at the place down the street, you can stay at her house, but then you'll have to sit down to pee because boys aren't allowed, and blah, 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 and they'll have this like listing of things, like it was like a little network of places, and it extended to Europe as well, and so they booked a tour of Europe in 91 in the same way, sending out envelopes with a poster. Maybe if we really thought it was likely we'd get a gig, we'd make like 10 posters and fold them up and put a 7-inch inside and then mail it to France or Spain or Amsterdam or wherever it was, and just hope that it would get there. Or sometimes you didn't even address it, right? You'd leave a stamp off of it, but you would in the address box you put the address of the place you wanted it to go in the return address. Mm-hmm. And you put it in the mail, and then they say, there's no stamp on this, we've got to send it back to where it came, and then they would send it to the place that you had originally intended because you put that in the return address box. That way you'd save money on stamps, right?
Yeah.
So like that was stuff that we would read about and like, oh yeah, let's try that thing, and I did. Yeah, funny. I should write my mom for that.
And I'm wondering, do you have some good stories to tell about that tour? I mean, you already...
Europe. Let's see. We lived on a boat for a while in Amsterdam in an abandoned warehouse of the Archer Daniel Midland Archer. No, ADM, the giant multinational food corporation. Mm-hmm. What is it? What does ADM stand for? Do you know what I mean? It's like Kellogg or something, but it's bigger.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but I can't remember exactly what the abbreviation stands for.
So it was this huge warehouse where they had built a concert hall and a recording studio and all these art studios that they had squatted and taken it over. And and there was a gate around it with barbed wire fence, and it was on the canal, on a big canal, a shipping canal. And so there were ships that people had their ships, and they would bring in their ships and like squat on the dock basically. And they had this community of squatters' boats where people lived on their boats, and they kind of shared some stuff on the docks. Some people were like doing drugs, and other people were like had their families with children, and they would have bonfires and trash cans, and they would have concerts or do art or make art cars before there were art cars. Right? They would make art cars before they made art before Burning Man. You know, that was participatory. Yeah, and it was very underground, and the police would come and try to kick them out, and they would. I remember one venue we played that was called the Frankreich in Amsterdam, where we slept after the gig, and in their building was very tall and narrow, mm-hmm. and like the buildings are in Amsterdam, maybe 5 stories high and as narrow as this apartment.
Yeah.
So everything would have to, you'd have to bring in your furniture on ropes, like pulleys, to the window, and just push it in, and then, place your furniture, chairs or whatever, because you couldn't carry it up the stairway because it was so narrow.
Yeah.
And we played there, and or we slept there, and they were like, "Yeah, you can crash here in this room or that room," and then there were like motorcycle helmets lined up on the floor, and then a pile of bricks, and baseball bats with like nails sticking out of them. I'm like, what is all these weapons for? They're like, well, when the cops come and try to kick us out, they use like tear gas, and sometimes they shoot at us with rubber bullets. So we have to use this stuff to defend ourselves. So we throw rocks on their heads so that they don't kick us out of our house. Because we squatted this place, and it's true. And I'm like, whoa, that is so intense, man. That is way worse than anything we have in America. Like, and the streets are so narrow and old that they would barricade the police out, and the police were afraid of the squatters. I mean, it wasn't the other way around. Like in Europe, in most European countries, like the police are afraid of people, not the other way around like it is in this country. We don't realize like what a police state we live in. Like it's unreasonable. It's unreasonable in a lot of ways.
Okay, like
so many people in prison here, and that's very different.
I bet. I mean, I've been to Europe. I haven't lived there, so I didn't really realize what.
Yeah, it was a big movement in the '70s, and when I went. I needed to write a paper for college, and I didn't want to be in Ohio, so I went to Europe for a year. I was traveling for about a year, and I was just staying in different places. But I remember I wrote my senior thesis on the squatters movement in Western Europe.
Okay.
So it really bloomed around like the early mid '70s, and then still remains today, and. Into the 2000s, but around then there was a lot of activism around housing because there wasn't enough, kind of like the Bay Area now or LA now. But people were there's even less housing, and it's only so much space because Amsterdam is the densest city in the world, like more than Hong Kong. There's so many people in a small area, and the rents would go up because it would become popular. The economy would be up in Europe, and so people wouldn't have places to live, and so they would have to take them because after World War II. Half of the housing and more than half of the housing in Europe was destroyed.
Yeah.
Right? So all these people came back from war and they had no place to live, and so they would just allow you to move into a place if you fixed it up. And so the law in England, when I was in England, was if you put your own lock on the door and had a bed and a chair in a council flat, which is like a public housing building that you broke into, if you could get your own lock on it and your own bed in it and your own chair, then they legally couldn't kick you out.
Nice.
You would be able to stay there until they would have to evict you, which could take 6 months.
So
when we tried to do that, we didn't get the lock on fast enough, and so we had to go to jail. So it's not. They were not playing around. It was like if you got the lock on, you'd be okay, but if you didn't, you were going to jail, and you might get beat up on the way. So it was a serious proposition.
One band in England who actually were squatters for a while was the Raincoats.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. Even the Clash. I mean, this guys they squatted. Was it Susie Sue? The history of the early punk movement's really interesting. It was the singer for the Slits was dating Joe Strummer from the Clash, and they lived in a squat.
That's right.
Maybe not the singer. Maybe this was a drummer.
Drummer.
Yeah. I believe so. Yeah, it's in their book. And I thought that and then the Crass compound was a squat in the suburbs of England. We were in the suburbs of London when we tried to squat this house, and that's another story entirely, which I'll save from another day. But we did go to jail, but then I was able to write about it for my paper.
There you go.
So it was research. Now I got a D- because I didn't I didn't have any bibliography because I just had lived experience and interviews, but I didn't have a bibliography. I didn't read enough books for it because there weren't any books written.
That sucks.
But it was better than an F because I wouldn't have finished college.
Alright, so tell me about recording Frenching the Bully.
It was a long process. We didn't know how to record an album. It seemed like a really daunting task, and we just thought we had to pick a person to record it, and we chose a guy to record it who had recorded the Screaming Trees and and Nirvana, and like some of those early sub pop bands. And his name was Steve, Fisk. He was also in a band called Pell Mell. It's like experimental prog rock jazz band kind of.
Yeah.
And he produced Tortoisehead and different bands later. But he said, I wanted to have him make a record, but he said, look at it, I just don't make a good rock record. I'm not good at it. Like, no, it doesn't matter. I love the Screaming Trees record, man. If you do it, just do your best, it'll be fine. He goes, no, man, I'm not really good at this. Like, redo it. And so he recorded it, and it sounded terrible. And he was right, man. He knew. And so we had to say, we want to remix the whole album and start over. And I know he was crushed, but like, and I felt terrible, like having to do it. But even it was so long ago. And he did record the basic tracks, and then we had our friend Scott Benson, who was very gung ho and basically managed the Gits for a while. Went to Europe with us. He mixed it. Yeah, I think he probably spent a lot of his own money mixing it.
Nice.
Yeah, and it came out. I mean, the first 2 cuts on that I think are so great. Like Absinthe and we drank Absinthe for a record release party actually because people made it although it was illegal. And Another Shot of Whiskey. Like the 2 first songs are just really great songs. I think.
I love Cut My Skin, It Makes Me Human.
Yeah, people like that song. It's really good. Yeah. And it was based on. I mean, everything in those lyrics is based on truth. You know, on not her necessarily Mia's truth, but people that she knew and was involved with and were friends with. Or
you know, I actually had somebody online ask me if one of your songs was inspired by the movie Blue Velvet.
Yes, it's true.
Really?
Yep. The words "Here's to your fuck." Yeah, it's inspired. It's Dennis Hopper says it. He's like the evil guy, right? The gangster. He's like, "Here's to your fuck, Frank," and then he drink Pabst Blue Ribbon. Yeah,
nice.
And that's where it's just based on a quote because Andy and Mia, and Matt, all of them were really good at doing impressions. So they would do impressions of different characters that they would meet, like a lot of New York characters and Jewish characters, and sort of with heavy accents, and they would be able to emulate that. And Mia as well was really funny. It was really funny, like with voices and things, and so sometimes that would make its way into our songs.
Nice.
Little quotes.
So after Frenching the Bully was released, did you notice that you were really getting a following? Like, I'm wondering how.
I don't think I ever really noticed. I mean, I knew what it took. I knew that you had to play a lot. I knew that you had to play a lot of different venues. I saw my friends' bands becoming popular and getting followings. I think there was some jockeying for position in that way. Like you'd have to make sure that you had a better poster or put out a single before, or we would play shows together, and who could get on what bills with what bands that were cool at a time. But it was very difficult, and I realized that the only way that we were going to get good gigs was if I booked them. So I started to book the gigs myself. I think Matt did it at first. And we all had Matt and I both had some part in it, but I decided to book a club, an all-ages club. I started to book this all-ages club called the OK Hotel in Seattle, and that was right when the whole punk grunge Seattle scene blew up. So the bands that would play there, like, it would just be packed out every night, and the place was just a little ballroom in the main floor of this 150-year-old building in Seattle that later was condemned from the earthquake. But it held about 200 people, and I remember getting over 500 people like packed in there. And the bands that would come through would play, go on to play State of Nirvana and Mother Love Bone and Soundgarden and the Gits and L7 and Babes in Toyland, and this was all during the course of like one summer. And then MTV showed up one time and started filming one weekend, all the shows one weekend. And then there was more of a buzz, and pretty soon, like, the word grunge was invented by a writer from England, and we played for that writer, I think. And but he'd seen punk and done punk, but he went back to write for Melody Maker, I think, or NME, these two music weeklies in London, where the English press is the most, revered like music press, I guess, or was then. And they coined the word grunge, and then they invented the scene in an article. But I think that they were done with punk. I'm just realizing this now. I think that we were decidedly punk. You know, we said we're punk. We wore Doc Martens, and people didn't do that yet then. You know, and we rolled up our pants and we had muscle shirts, and we just wore whatever. We didn't change anything we did on stage. Like what we wore to work, after work, like we wore on stage later that night, because it's the same. It wasn't a different life. We weren't posing in any way. We were just being ourselves. So we didn't do my hair is probably more attention now to it than I ever did before, right? And but that was like, part of the whole invest your entire life into what you're doing, and it's just how it. That's just the only way we knew how to make a record. And I'm jumping around, but it all seems kind of the same. That do-it-yourself ethic, and thinking that you're doing it for the art itself as opposed to doing the art for people. Or I think we recorded that record without thinking what anyone would think of it. We just knew we had to get it out. And so it was very improvised, and a lot of it was made up on the spot, like the drum solo in the first song, the rhythm of that. We went on to play those songs over and over until they were tight, but they were barely, maybe half of those songs were completely written. Maybe all of them had a structure, but Mia certainly hadn't finished the lyrics to all of them until she was in the studio, and then they would go on. She would keep them that way.
And while you were recording that, is that when you really realized we could do something with this band? I mean, you were around all.
No, we started getting more attention. I think once we got back from Europe, I think we were kind of triumphant. Like, we booked our own tour of Europe. By putting the address in the wrong place on the envelope, we were able to afford it, and we came back and we had money. Like, oh my God, we can pay rent. We had all this different colored money from Europe. Like kroner from Norway and Deutschmarks and Swiss marks and all kinds of money. And so it just felt really good to have like paid our own way. We sold out of the merchandise, and we were gone for a few months. And so when we came back and played the West Coast here again, we were like, oh, this is the band they went to Europe, So it started a buzz, like that we had done it ourselves, and other bands were wanting to go there but couldn't figure out how to do it. And even though we didn't have great shows, it was still one of my dreams was to play in Europe, like because I lived there when I was younger. That was like one of my fantasies. So I think landing in Europe, and right before the first show, I remember thinking, it was in Eindhoven, Holland, thinking that I had fulfilled a dream. Like this was like, that felt like the pinnacle of the Gits to me. It was like just before, like the opening band was playing, and we were headlining at a show in Eindhoven, Holland, and the place was packed with kids, and it was like 100 degrees, and and I remember feeling great, like, wow, I've really accomplished something in my life. And that was it. So I think that was it. That was like probably the pinnacle of the Gits career, was like start playing in Europe.
Cool.
But when we came back, people recognized that we weren't messing around. We weren't amateurs. We meant business, and all of a sudden, people started coming to our shows, and we started moving from opening for bands to headlining places. And some of the last shows we had were quite good, and Mia was brilliant. And there's some video that I've been discovering of servicing of us playing, and I'm really surprised at how tight we are. I watch it, I'm like, gosh, we were so focused on being good at what we did that it just comes across as a powerful band. And I was at New Year's Eve this year. I went to see my friend play, and he plays with Les Claypool from Primus, and he started Primus with Les Claypool, and he was playing New Year's Eve, and he invited me backstage, and Yoko Ono's son Sean Lennon was also headlining with Les Claypool on bass and Sean Lennon, and Yoko was there, and I met Yoko backstage, and we smoked a joint, and we drank champagne, and she was really nice, and she was in a wheelchair, and she had a little entourage. They pushed her on. She was beautiful, and she was all dressed in white, and I remember thinking, oh my God, that's Yoko Ono. It is. I tried to take pictures, but they didn't come out strangely. They're all fuzzy, like you can't tell if it's like a ghost or like a human. Well, it's really trippy. It's all red.
Well, that's kind of how people saw her anyway.
Yeah, but I was like, she didn't deserve that. She's so nice. She didn't break up the Beatles. Come on. It's ridiculous. He didn't want to do it anymore.
I know.
He didn't get along with Paul.
Yeah. I think a lot of the feelings toward her are sexist and racist.
It's just sexist and racist, yeah. And we're still that anti-Japanese anti-Asian sentiment all over, and like there still is now.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. And she was an artist that challenged people to think about music and art in a different way, and film and activism. I had major respect for her. And I forgot what my point was, but Primus was also starting about that time. We played, I think we might have played with them, and we had this connection with San Francisco, that we were gaining a following in San Francisco before, more so than in Seattle. So when we came to San Francisco, it was more of like, people would pack places, and we were headlining and could choose where we played, and that was easy. And then pretty soon that spread to Los Angeles and San Diego, and we were just sort of conquering each town as we went. And I think we thought of it as conquering a town. Like we went all the way to like Albuquerque, and then we were going to go to like Tempe, and then we were just going to then the final goal, like the like Oz, the land of Oz was New York City to play at CBGB's, like because Andy and Matt and Mia had been there too. I'd never been there. It was a legend. I'd never been to New York City, you know.
Yeah.
And we were going to play in New York City 2 days after Mia was killed. Like 2 days, we had a show booked. I think it was at CBGB's, or maybe it's a place called Brownies that was a little bit bigger. But it didn't happen. So that tour was to start with L7 and 7 Year Bitch. We're going to tour from New York back to San Francisco, and the Pope John Paul II was speaking in each of those cities. So we would have played, and it was going to be a pro-choice concert tour. It was a pro-choice tour, and we're going to be so we're going to play all the cities where the Pope was preaching about anti-abortion Catholicism, right, and anti-female taking people's rights. We were going to play all those cities to draw attention to that there's another world out there. You know?
Yeah.
So I don't even know if 7 Year Bitch L7 did that tour. I think maybe they did not. I think maybe they bailed. I think 7 Year Bitch did. I don't see how they could have gone on after that. And they couldn't have, because they were around. I'm sure they didn't go on that tour. And after that, we were supposed to go to Europe, back to Europe, and then come back into. We probably would have been on tour about 6 months.
Okay.
And on the last moment that we were back and coming back to Seattle after a final tour, Mia was like, I have a really bad feeling about it. I just don't want to go back to Seattle. I hate it there. I'm done. Let's move. Let's go to San Francisco. Or let's move to Europe and play and just get the hell out of here. And I don't want to go home right now. I wish we could keep touring and stay on the road. And I was like, just hold on for a couple days. And in 2 days, we're going to finish the vocals on the record. And then we're going to go on tour. And then we'll be out of here for months and months. And yeah, so that was a real letdown. So it was kind of the opposite of Eindhoven, because she didn't. Those 2 days that we had that she would cross paths with the person that killed her. So we never did go to Europe or to New York. All the plans got cut short.
And I'm very sorry that happened. And so are
yeah, of course, yeah, it's horrible. But unfortunately, that's part of the story, and it's like the part of the story that I think is way overplayed and way overemphasized. When I look up the Gits on Wikipedia, it's all about a punk singer who was murdered. It has nothing to do. No one's written about. I mean, sure, there are people that say, "Oh, this was a great band," or one of the great bands, but it's always prefaced with the singer was murdered and it was female. And there are people that obsess and that are like groupie fans, like fan kids, fan adults of murder mysteries shows. And so we needed to do those shows in order to try to find who killed her. So we are in syndication as the band with the murdered singer, on Unsolved Mysteries or Forensic Files, and it's really enraging after a while. And I wish they would stop broadcasting it. That's why I'm writing a book about my relationship with Mia and the Gits, and that covers pretty much the times that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
But it'll discuss the creative process and where her lyrical genius lie, and how we related and how we lived together and created together and recorded, and many of these questions that you're asking, I'm trying to cover for people like you who are really interested in the music, and maybe we're drawn to the Gits or found out about it through publicity around crime TV or something. But like maybe discovered a lot more. There's a lot more there, and tried to look deeper. Because a lot of people have asked me, they don't know the real history because they get bombarded with murder mysteries, or she's a feminist like icon, or some sort of a martyr. People call me all the time or email me, and they tell me about their sexual assaults and things that happened to them. And I just don't know if I want to be re-traumatized like that anymore. You know? It's like I'm very sorry, but I don't have anything to offer, and it's I just want to recreate the narrative around the way people think of the Gits, and I hope that I can. Some people will read it and it'll get published, but it's just about finished, and hopefully I'll find a publisher.
Good. And one thing that you're talking about this, and it kind of reminds me of something that Dave Grohl said about the way people look at Nirvana's history.
Yeah, exactly. He was able to have another band after that was hugely successful, more successful even than Nirvana, and I thought we had our band after it as well, but we could not find anyone to replace Mia, right? There was no replacement for her. So as a band, we really could not continue without just being the three of us. So we did more touring and more recording as a three-piece, or we added our sound guy and best friend Julian to be rhythm guitar. And we actually, I think we produced more music and toured more and played more shows than we ever did in the Gits. And but it's not really remembered because neither Andy nor I were singers, and we didn't really know what we were doing. And Andy stepped up to sing, and it was so completely different. But there are an album, 4 singles, and an EP out by the band. So, and then I continued to play in different bands after that, and that band ended in 1996 when I quit. Maybe it was 98. It seemed like it went on for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then I started a band with Vanessa Veselka, she's a writer. She's like a third wave feminist writer from New York City, and I had a band with her called the Pinkos, which was a overtly sort of leftist political organizing activist band with just, I figured like 2 people would be better than like 4 or 6 or 8. It'd be easier to tour because we could tour in like her VW Bug and stuff and take drive to the shows. Just the 2 of us, it was easy. And then, but I also had an Irish band at the same time called the St. Bushmills Choir, and that band got really popular right in Seattle. It was like Irish punk kind of Motorhead meets the Pogues meets the Clash, and we just reached 1 million on Spotify.
That's right.
Yep, we have a gold record, a gold stream. We have a golden stream. We have a golden stream on Spotify. We've got 1 million streams.
It's an honor.
So think of what that means. I'm on Easy Street.
Tell me about when you were approached by Atlantic Records.
We're on the very last tour that we ever did down the West Coast and then back up, and we were starting to have a crowd at every show.
Tell me about when you were approached by Atlantic Records.
We're on the very last tour that we ever did down the West Coast and then back up, and we were starting to have a crowd at every show, and we're headlining a lot of the shows. And in I think I started in LA. We had played at Al's Bar, where Beck had opened the show, like just with his acoustic guitar and his 2 friends. And I remember I really liked Beck. I thought Beck was cool and made me listen to it. I was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. He had like a boombox for like a band and stuff. And when we played, like L7 was there, and the Bad Religion guy, and the 7 Year Bitch were in town as well. I think it was about the same time because we've been celebrating or toasting to Stephanie Sargent, their guitarist, who died a year, like exactly 1 year before Mia almost.
Yeah.
They were there supporting us, but that was it. And there was a strange man who wore a sport coat and had looked like permed hair, like curly black hair, and his name was Tim, and then he showed up at another gig, and then he showed up at a 3rd gig, and he was signing 7 Year Bitch, or had signed 7 Year Bitch to Atlantic Records, and then thought that the band that the Gits was, he took us out to lunch after the gig, and we thought we had to pay, but we didn't. We didn't have to pay, fortunately, because it was very expensive. but that's in the movie. They he claims that he was drawing up the contract and going to fax it to our quote manager right when when the day Mia was killed. So it was very surely like going to be a record deal that we would make 5 or 10 records for Atlantic, and we'd have full control over whatever we did, and they would just put out the music and distribute it and pay us, and we'd have careers and I would have reached that goal since my 10-year-old goal. Not 10-year-old, but from the age 10 of being a professional musician. And that sort of, it never came to be. So there's no point in wrestling with it now. But I saw he wrote an article in Salon.com recently that said that because he later signed Hootie and the Blowfish, which is a band. I love the facial expression. Oh, God, I know, right? So what he said was, I could have signed the best band in the world, but instead I signed Hootie and the Blowfish. And it was something like along those. It was almost exactly those words. Like I could have signed the best rock band in the country at the time. However, I signed Hootie and the Blowfish and made millions of dollars, something like that. And he wrote an article about it. And I thought it was really funny, and I wrote to him and I thanked him for the kudos, But those kudos have almost, it's like handkerchiefs and hand grenades or something, horseshoes and hand grenades. Like it ain't gonna help. It's not gonna change anything, It's not gonna make anything better. That the fact that we could have been, would have been, should have been, right? And that's been, I think, the 3 Udas. Those are the 3 Udas that that could drive you crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda. Like it ain't. So like, I went to college for 6 years and I still say ain't. It ain't helping. It doesn't help to know, but it does help that when younger people discover the Gits and they write, posts or they, hear Mia for the first time, like who is that? Oh my God! Or I see, we'll have so many thousands of followers on Spotify or something, and so that's all gratifying, and that you want to interview me is gratifying. That there's something there that's inspired you to interview people, make art or music or tell stories, and that's, I thank you. It's pretty awesome. Does that answer your question? I don't remember.
It does. And I mean, I'm, and we'll move on in a second, but I mean, one thing that I'm curious about is, this gentleman called you the best rock band at the time. Did you feel like you had the potential to be commercially successful in the way that Pearl Jam was and Nirvana?
I don't think so. I don't think on that level. I don't think it would have been healthy to be successful on that level. I mean, I think we'd still be a band now. We'd be playing a few times a year, and maybe not have to, struggle for an existence. That we might be able to play a few shows a year and have a lot of people come and make money that way. But I think like a band like X is a sort of inspiration for me, because even though the guitar player has cancer right now, I hope he's okay. But there's still a band, and no one died, and the same 4 people, and they're amazing. Like now they're older and they're better musicians, and they play the songs that they wrote when they were practically teenagers, and it's so powerful, it's so awesome, And I think that like we'd be a band like that, still playing, probably writing music, taking breaks from each other, and still doing it. That's what I always thought would happen. That's what I expected would happen. I never thought that the band would end. Why would you you can't break your family up, right?
Yeah.
You can't do it. Even if you don't like them sometimes, you can't just break them up. And that's the way that I think that would have ended. So bands have been my de facto family since I moved out from home, So I've been played in bands since, and now I'm playing in this band called Wolves in Argyle with my friend Dave, who's a nut job, but and we just put out this album.
Yep. Got the record, yay!
Dangereux. And it's dangerous, I think, in French. But it's kind of a hard rock record that's kind of punk and kind of grunge. It's difficult to classify. There are like elements of hardcore and elements of ballads, of you know, of Journey songs, like slow ballads and interesting image oriented lyrics, I think. But people sometimes say, "Oh, I'm so glad to hear you." They'll say, "What are you doing now? Are you playing in any band?" I'll be like, "Yeah, duh." Like since I was a kid, I was like 16 or something. In this place I worked in, I said, "Oh, you still play music, Mister?" I was like, "Yeah." And they look at me kind of pathetically. "Oh, I'm glad you're still active." Like that. I was just like, "What are you talking about? Like, you don't even know what you're talking about." Of course, I'm still active. I play in 5 bands and I work 2 jobs, and But I'm still active. I'm still playing drums, and I'm better now than I was as a drummer than then. Really,
Yeah,
I think the band would be pretty awesome too. We were writing songs that were more pop oriented. I think they were more melodic, more that were less, way more like pop and accessible than songs like "Here's to Your Fuck" or "Insecurities," right?
Yeah.
Or a band like that hard edge, sort of angry part. Mia was writing a song called the Pterodactyl Song, for example, on piano. She would play piano in pizzeria where she was working like after hours and write songs, and Andy was working with her to write some really beautiful melodies that wouldn't come to me, but it would have, I think, been popular.
And I'm kind of curious what you thought of her in comparison to other women. I mean, she was around at the time when Riot Girl was in full swing, and Courtney Love was a very popular figure from that time as well. Like, did you think that she? I mean, I think she certainly had one of the best vocal chops of that group.
Yeah, I think so too. I watch some live footage of Janis Joplin concerts, and I think, wow, they really would have liked each other. I think they would have been a force, the two of them together. And it almost feels like it was a torch passed from Janis Joplin to Mia, and like they both had that came from the South, small town but urban lifestyle and rough kind of areas, and Mia being born in Detroit and growing up in Louisville, I guess the Rust Belt, it's pretty hardcore, and it's Trump country, and she was raised in Catholic schools, like in singing in church like Janis Joplin, and I hear Janis singing, and I think Mia was better in a lot of ways. Like Mia had more dynamics and more control over her voice, and Janis really seemed just to like scream so hard it almost sounded shrill. I almost can't listen to it sometimes. Yeah, Mia had a warmth to her voice that was different.
Yeah, she definitely has more tone in her voice.
More tone, yeah. Similar musicality and similar love of the blues, and like Big Mama Thornton. I had a blues band with Mia for a while. We made some really cool music with just acoustic guitar and piano and bass and drums and singing. That I don't think I sent it to you, but there's some amazing stuff of her, and I promised that I would help her put out a solo record. The last thing I said to her, she asked me if it would be okay. Do you think the guys would be mad if I put out a solo record, like just me and acoustic guitar? Like, do you think I could do that? And I was like, yeah, I think it's fine. I don't care. I'll help you. Whatever those guys don't want to spend time doing that, then maybe Andy will play guitar, but maybe you'll play guitar, and I'll help record it and make sure that it happens. And she's like, okay, see you later. And that was like the last discussion we had, and so I still have yet to make that record, and I've been finding tracks to where her voice really comes out, because it's not a punk band behind her, but just acoustic guitar, where she's doing demoing these songs, or do these old blues songs by Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey and Billie Holiday even, and I think that someday that'll be a record.
Good.
Yeah, I hope so.
And I'm really grateful that you're writing the book. I mean, one thing that when I first got into the Gits, one thing that I was a little struck by was the fact that Mia, to my knowledge, did not leave an interview. I mean, there's nobody who actually recorded an interview with her. So.
I found one, actually.
Oh, you did?
I did. I found one on tape, yeah. I think I accidentally erased it, because it was handheld things, but I think I can digitally bring it out again. Okay. I have to figure it out, but I found one, and there's very very little versions of her recordings of her just speaking voice. But I found some of that too on B-sides, reels that we recorded, and at shows in between songs she'll talk sometimes. But yeah, I miss her voice. It was really funny. I mean, she had a really really funny sort of accent. And she was, yeah.
And like I mean, I've read a little bit of what Steve has written so far about their time together, and I like that people are going to get a sense of her real personality, and that there's not going to be as much of an emphasis on what happened at the end. You know, we were talking a little bit earlier about how the end obscures what a wonderful time you guys had together.
Yeah, it wasn't always wonderful. There were definitely dark days, and but knowing that there was someone else. Actually, your handwriting looks a lot like hers.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of like forward and backwards, and like. Do you have dyslexia?
No.
But it does look like a letter she would write, like very small letters and words, and sort of this is neat and this is sloppy. But anyway, yeah, I just think that the focus has been way too. Well, I think the focus on Mia and being her death is ridiculous, and like what if she had anything to offer, it was through the music and through how she made music and how she lived her life and how she treated people. I mean, that's her contribution to the world and to me personally. And I just want to share that contribution, not the murder investigation or the trial or the fact that we found the guy. I mean, that's all documented. That's all on TV. You can be a fan of that if you like. But if being a fan of music and where music comes from and the influences of the people that you like now, then you could read a book about that I'm going to write.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So.
Alrighty. So wrapping up,
okay.
What are your future plans? I mean, I know that you're also a counselor. And
yeah, I'm a psychotherapist, and I need to check my email. But I work in Berkeley as a psychotherapist with people with depression and trauma and all kinds of issues, and in a private practice, and I do drumming groups like therapeutic drum workshops for people at a hospital in Marin County, and also privately and in different places.
Nice.
So yeah, so I'm able to combine music with social work, and that's kind of been the new focus. When I was in the Gits, I felt like I was doing the same thing. I was gonna change the world by force of music, and now I'm just trying to help people out a little bit, one at a time. So that to me is gratifying. So that's what I do.
Nice.
Neither one pays, but what the fuck, it doesn't matter. Can edit that.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's like Between Two Ferns. You know that show?
I haven't watched it.
It's funny. It's like there's a fern here and a fern there, and people sit between them, and then they kind of like joke.
Oh, right, with Zach Galifianakis. Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's silly, but we won't do that.
Okay. Anyway, we've been talking with Steve Moriarty. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.